Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and this is being put together for you on a New Year's Eve. Interesting ideas. My name is Stan Houston, and what I decided to do is do something that a lot of us old guys do. You know, a lot of people look forward to the new year, and oh my goodness, they make resolutions about how different the year will be. Well, most of us don't do that anymore at this age and stage, and in fact, what we really do is sometimes we actually use the year to look back on the good times in the past. Kind of the old lang syne, you know, acquaintances, memories, we bring them forward and perhaps see if we can maybe learn something for the new year from the things we experienced, the joys, the agonies, the ecstasies, the tragedies, the victories, and certainly, most importantly, the relationships we've had through the years. So that's our interesting idea. And so I've asked two old guys, good friends. I've known them for many years. And between the three of us, we have over 200 years of life and experience. So Harold, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Stan. It's just great to be together.
It is good. Harold's one of those people, my wife says, she says, you know, you could have not met Harold for 3 years, but within 3 minutes, it's like you've never been separated. And that's true. And then one of the men who helped save my life, he's Dr. James Stru. And I remember one night at the Longfellow Cafe, he sat down and said, Stan, I'm a little concerned about that blood test reading. I think we got to check that out. And I'm very glad we did. Make a long story very short as a result of a number of things. My PSA came in at 0.01. And so as of May, I'm 5 years cancer free, and I should have been dead. But except for Dr. Jim, who started me on the road, and Dr. Jenny, who did the surgery, and Jesus, who saved me, I wouldn't be here tonight. So I'm grateful. Jim Stru. Hi, Dr. Jim. Welcome.
Hi. It is a wonderful time of the year to look at a new year, and when I think of it, I think of a bit of yes. We really wouldn't. We're too old to think that it's. Why me when you get a prostate exam and
Right.
it's positive, it's why not me.
That's right.
So I mean we're really at that point. So
and as I will say on January 1st, by God's grace, we made it another year.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I'm going to tell a story, and then I'm going to ask you guys to tell a story. All right? Okay.
Yep.
Many years ago, when I was young and stupid, I had a quarrel with my dear wife Karen, and what it was is whether she threw me out or whether I left, I stomped out of the house on a cold Minnesota day. Not knowing what to do, I walked down 3 blocks to a church, which obviously was having a service on Sunday morning, and it was warm, so I went and sat in the back and just sat there. And I noticed right away, though, that the man up in front who was preaching the message, there was something there different, some energy and power. And at the end of the service, he comes back as he does, and he stops and he sees this kind of young man there, and in effect, he preached the gospel to me in the next few words. He looked at me and said, I think you need a friend. How did he know that? And that was how I met Pastor Carl Johansson. And that incident changed my life. It saved my life. It saved my marriage, because going from there, a long-term relationship developed. And part of the reason I called my friends together is because essentially a week ago was a sad day for me because every Christmas Eve is somewhat sad because, Jim, you know this, you were there. It was on a Christmas Eve that Pastor Carl Johansson passed away. It's over 20 years now, isn't it, Jim?
Stan, I actually don't remember when Pastor Carl passed, but I knew him well, and
No, I know it was Christmas Eve. I remember that well.
Yeah, in that whole process. So yeah, it was it brings back memories of how much motivation he had in his life for other people.
Well, what I'd like to do is, I just told people how I met him. How did you guys meet him? Tell me about some of your first and.
Well, I was a young doctor, and I married one of his my spouse, Carolyn, has been in his parish for years. She grew up there, and so I invited his wife Alice invited me over for lunch after church one afternoon, and we became interested in talking about the concept of whether faith in life, whatever that faith is, whether you have a faith and it does it cause you to be healthy.
Oh.
So
well, that's how you met.
Got me going and got me excited about the fact that as a young physician that there would be some connection between what I believe, my faith, and what keeps me well. Perhaps even we started talking about, well, how does going to church affect your health? So those are one of the pieces that brought his profession into mine, and we started talking about that for a long period.
Well, it's amazing how things happen if we marry the right woman. Harold, how did you first meet Pastor Carl?
Well, I was working as a college administrator, and my wife and I were kind of out there looking for a church. And one of the faculty members in the biology department, whom you know, Dr. Thorpe, at a coffee break on campus, we got visiting, and he found out that we were looking for a church. And he said, why don't you come on out and visit Trinity? And so we have really a wonderful pastor, and maybe you'll find a home there, or maybe you'll like it. So, and we were really open to a suggestion. And so we did. We went out and we walked in the door, and you could just, I don't know, I just sensed something different because it just seemed like there was a pulse there, a real lively, there was an atmosphere that was just kind of, I don't know, it just felt warm and welcoming. And so,
Harold, I haven't experienced it any other place quite like that. Right, you are so right.
Yeah, it's that thing where it's really hard to put your finger on it in terms of what are the words to describe it, but you know it when you find it.
Right.
And anyway, so the service began, and there was obviously there was a lot of people there, and that was appealing, so that there was an energy, and then he started preaching, and I will never forget it. It was powerful in the sense that it had such a solid ring of truth to it. And Sylvia and I had been out looking, so we had been in different places. And none of them were bad places to be, but we were just looking for that place where it would click. And I looked over at Sylvia, and she looked back at me, and I said, "I think we found the place." And she nodded yes. And so from that time forward, we were at Trinity, and that was sometime late fall of 1969, and January of 1970, we became members. So, and my experience was hearing a man who was completely convinced that what he was preaching was the truth. It came through immediately, and I said, I want to be around a person like that.
Yeah. Part of the problem is, guys, is this Pastor Joe spoiled us for anybody else. you know, like, I will even say this, it's always hard for me to find a doctor, because since, Jim isn't around where I live anymore, I'm always going to compare the doctor to Dr. Jim, and none of them quite match up to him. Some are close, but not the same. And I guess that's what I wanted just to share, because my heart is, I would very much like that the very legacy of Pastor Carl Johansson be carried on. And Harold, could you were the one who told me a little bit more about some of the greatness of just the expressions of how he stood there in the pulpit and how he spoke. Can you reminisce a little bit about that experience of that man? I remember he got off his knees he prayed on his knees during the prayer, and he strode up to the pulpit, and it was like he brought us into a new world.
Yeah, and that maybe this will give you just a little insight into his enthusiasm for what he was doing. And by that, I mean he was absolutely enthused about being able to preach the word of God. And I remember the first time I heard this, I'm afraid I may have laughed out loud. But he stopped in the middle of his point, and he looked at all of us sitting there, and he leaned over and said, "Now, isn't that good news?"
Yes.
And so if I were to just kind of roll forward, in terms of what are my takeaways for being under his ministry, there were three things that I took away from, well, technically four things. The first thing was he would always say, "Now I've told you my understanding of the word. Now you go home and you pull up the word and read it yourself. Pull out your Bible and see if I'm right." He never told us what to believe. He just exposited the scriptures and left it up to us to really verify it. And I loved that kind of intellectual freedom. So then, three principles that I have taken and used in my life for the last, 50 years. The principles were, number one, the scriptures, the Bible, is the standard for truth and life. Number two, the scriptures always, no matter where you start or you can finish, they always point to Jesus. And the third thing is the scriptures interpret themselves. So it doesn't matter where you start. If it doesn't feel like they're interpreting themselves, you just haven't read long enough. And you need to keep reading. And those three principles have guided my thinking ever since. I mean, it guides my thinking for when I hear others preach or talk or present. And the thing that I so treasure about those things is those are tools that Pastor Johansson gave as part of his ministry. So he was, as the Bible tells us, equipped the saints. He was equipping the saints. And he gave us the tools to use. He didn't tell us, this is what you have to believe. He preached the word and he let God do the rest of it. So to me, he modeled what I think is really good preaching. Yeah. And good leading in terms of how do you lead a flock of people? You equip the saints. And he did. And those principles were the things that I took away and have used the rest of my life.
Jim, he not only was your pastor, but he was the one who very much encouraged you in your life mission of this seemingly difficult task of getting the medical world and the world of God's Spirit to come together and respect each other. And he encouraged you to try an experiment. And I always say experiments never fail. Even if the project failed, experiments never fail. To try and see if we could integrate both the healing of the spirit through the church and the healing of the body through the wise application of modern medicine. We have to be brief, but because you could go a long time and we'll do that. How did he encourage you as a young doctor to take the risk of giving a life to encouraging both the spirit and the science of medicine to somehow come together in people's lives?
I was thinking back to what Harold said about his presence in the service, and it almost was it was a very compelling presence, almost as if a participant in something pretty big, and this is what I want to commit to, and an enthusiasm was there, and he was one of these people that it was an experiment in doing God's work. He didn't see the pastorate as the essential piece of it all. He was part of it, but he wanted us to be participant in that same enthusiasm, the motivation for something more, and to take some risks and be an experimenter. Whether and you're going to learn something in an experiment whether you succeed, really. And he actually said, well, why don't we figure out how to do that? How does faith keep people well? And
You know, and that is
science, and Stanley, it's taken science all these years to come to grips with the fact that intuition and faith is a key component to keeping people well. And now we're having to start to defend ourselves, or that the science is starting to have to defend themselves about.
That's right. Yes.
Why they're different, why there's a supernatural and natural, why there's dualism of how to interpret what's going on.
You know, and I'm so glad you mentioned that too. The very sense of his presence, like Harold saying when he leaned forward and said, "Isn't that good news?" The same way he greeted me at that terrible moment at the pew, and even as all of us grew as younger men, and that was a long time ago, but he wasn't doctrinaire in what God's will was. Now, when I kind of felt the mission about, well, maybe I'd like to get involved in missionary radio, well, he didn't say, oh yeah, that's great, you should be a missionary. He didn't even try to do that. What he said was, he said, Stan, that would seem to be kind of some of your gifts together. Why didn't you give it a try? He didn't, he didn't go into highfalutin talk about your calling and things. No. Give it a try. See what happens. I'm with you. And he was. But he let us discover it, and he said it might not work out. But that's okay. Let's see if God's going to give you an opportunity to put together your love of teaching and your love of radio, and to do so. Let's just see if it works. Isn't that a unique way to lead? Let's just see if it works.
Yeah, no,
and it might not.
I sense it that way too.
Okay.
Let me just add to that just another comment. I saw him do that with other people as well. where maybe, to an outsider from, well, that's not even the right word. Um, just looking on, somebody might say, well, that's kind of a dumb idea, but he didn't do that.
Right.
He would say, you know what? Let's just this man is or this woman has gotten an idea, and we don't know if it's going to be successful or not. Let's just encourage them, because if it's not a good idea, it's going to fall on its own. Well, we'll encourage him all the way through it. And I thought, what a gracious, honest, and supportive response to somebody who has an idea. Let's see where it goes. Just exactly like you were saying. And I saw him do that. You can learn a lot from that.
I did. I mean,
Good. Yeah.
it sticks with me to this day. Um, as I
How does that fit into the new year, Stanley?
Well, okay, yeah, I think that's where we're all going at this stage. I'm because right now I'm saying, okay, at this age and stage, all of us are what I call, we're in our encore. you know, we've put on a half century of show,
Yeah.
and we've done fairly well at it. Though we've had, like anything else. I remember Carol Burnett. That'll date us, won't it?
It does.
Who had that show, and she one time said, "Well, you can't have a good show every time." What do you mean?
And she was so wonderful.
She
really
was so wonderful. And so, what is God calling us to do? At this stage in our lives, and for all of us, I think my wife has a little thing that said, "I wish heaven had visiting hours." And the question I'm now saying to people is, if you had visiting hours in heaven, who would you visit? What would you ask them? What would you like to know? And I said, what I would like to do is, I found this man to be such an unusual person in my life. Yet, certainly he had an ego, but it was a strong one, was not a big one. And in effect, he just so exemplified a Christian gentleman pastor. And I remember with other younger people, even us, some of our they were 10 or 15 years younger than us, we were going. And I remember a guy named Larry Bell, a woman named Faith, was Faith Zeller, Faith Eldall at that time, saying, we would listen to him preach the gospel, and we'd say, how did he see that? He'd have this insight from scripture, and we'd say, wow.
But he had a little place for all of us, didn't he? In his preaching. I mean, I felt I was, I could be a participant.
Yes, and there's a part of me that says, so much of that is lacking. There's a part of me that would like to maybe, get the top 10 Carl Johansson sermons, or at least the top 100, and bring them back. Like, for instance, my own daughter, she asked me about it. She said, tell me about this Carl Johansson guy. I said, well, why are you interested? And she said, because he changed my life. I said, what do you mean? She said, he changed you, and guess what happened to me?
That's pretty cool.
He said, obviously, I live because of what this man was to my mother and my father. Obviously, it had an impact on my life, and I think it was good. So that's a little bit of where I wanted this New Year's. But Jim, that is the question for this New Year's. It's obviously a tough New Year's. Let's make a resolution. We're going to try and put together some of the fabled teaching of Pastor Carl Johansson that we love so much, and maybe enjoy it again and hear it again. But let's just kind of conclude this program by saying, based on what we've talked about and where we are, what do you think this all does mean for the new year? Jim, I'll start with you, and then I'll go to me, and then Harold, you wind it up, okay? What does this mean to you, Jim, for the new year?
It is always filled with sense of that I am a participant in something that's bigger than me. And the question is, how will that be expressed? And
Yeah.
I think that I think of my role in terms of family and work and surviving in a sense of what am I assume my responsibilities, the maintenance parts, the parts of being present to the people as much as I can, particularly my family, particularly the people around me, people where I work, people where I live, and good friends. And I think that I also have have an aspiration for something more that I don't even know about. That's part of my life that will present itself in both accepting the things I can't handle and engaging the things, both this silence and action piece of my life, that be able to correctly.
You're going to walk
Look at not so much,
22.
What I'm doing, but more the fruitfulness of it, and more of a sense of how is he using what's my role in his purposes.
Yeah. Well, and then I think part of what has come to me is more and more because Pastor Joe, of course he'd said this, but that's what pastors are supposed to say. He talked about the power of prayer. But when you're young, you say, okay, sure, yeah, but it's up to me. I got to create my own destiny. We're gung ho. We're hard driving men. We're going to make things happen. I think more and more I've come to see that I know that Carl Johansson was prayed for, and he asked for prayer. I still remember the moment one time when I was, I was leading we're sitting together because I was going to be the liturgist. That's how he mentored us young rogues. He made us participate in the service. Yeah, that's what he did to it. He had a group of young men, and he dressed us up in the costume and put us in there and told us these things. And I remember one time that he got in, and he looked up and he grabbed my hand and put it on his shoulders and said, "Pray for me." What? Me pray for you? And this is right in the service. And so I gurgled out something, and he smiled, said thank you, strode up to the platform and preached powerfully. And so I think there's some of that power of prayer that I'd like to maybe capture that I think he had. That's something I'm trying to look forward to. Harold, what about you? Your life has been agony and ecstasy and up and down and back and forth, just like all of ours. What are you looking forward to?
Well, I'm moved by your words, Jim, and I think you've really set the table here. And so I guess the word that comes to me is how can I, as a senior citizen, be relevant for the gospel? How can I be relevant for my family? And Jim used the word presence. That's just such a powerful word for me. And I experienced that sometime we can talk about it, but I experienced what the power of presence really is in some critical moments in my life, and it's I don't know how to say this except that I want to be able to provide that gift to others because I know how much it's that power of presence. And by that I mean people who were so open and so unselfish in sharing themselves with me and sharing who Christ was in their lives that it made a difference. It made the kind of difference that still ministers to me after many years. And so presence to me is it's a call to ministry and it's a call to me personally. I want to be able to do that this coming year.
Well, thank you, guys. That's because we're just three old guys on the radio having a conversation. And hey, for those of you who are kind of listening in, thank you for doing that. Thank you for putting up with us. But we hope that our own thoughts of mind, heart, and spirit have hopefully been helpful to you on this coming new year. It's going to be a difficult year. It's going to be a challenging year. But I please want to remember, we are to be more than conquerors, that the very Spirit of God will pervade the medicine we take and the things that we do and the relationships that we have. And we'd be grateful if you would help us perhaps do what we want to do, is to make sure that Pastor Carl Johansson, his words of wisdom, his wit too. I remember he had lots of corny jokes and his deep humility, yet his deep personal power in the Word of God, that we can share more of that, and that we will all, he said it at Christmas Eve, but actually it's a New Year's Eve. God bless us all, everyone. And so I want to thank you, gentlemen, for being a part of that. And I want to thank you who are listening. And we hope to hear from you, that you may join these three old guys in some of the same adventures of life that we're seeking in 22. Best and blessings to you. All the best for the new year. Bye for now.